Welcome everyone to the first official episode of the Jonas and Dane show that we are temporarily calling Barbaric Banter or Barbarian Banter. Whichever one you guys like better, you're going to let us know in the comments. I'm your host, Jonas Kilker.
And I am Dane MillerHaas, and it is my honor and pleasure to break in this first episode with you, Jonas.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, this is something that Dane and I have been kind of talking about doing for a long time. We both have just been wanting to find a place where we can sort of expand on ideas in a more kind of uncut way, in the way that you would with a podcast. And having been the second and first guest on Dane's podcast, a lot of people already thought that the show belonged to both of us anyways. So I figured, why not just bring that to life? At the same time, though, this is going to be a little bit more of a topical web show. It's not necessarily just going to be interview style back and forth, obviously. So we do have some topics on the docket today. And we're going to break into them pretty quickly. But Dane, what do you have for us today?
So today's going to be a pretty interesting episode because if you guys are already following Jonas on YouTube, which you should be, he has been talking, of course, about the Indo-European migrations, and he recently did a very interesting episode on the Scythians. And in that video, which I learned a lot about, he explained how the Scythians and the Sarmatians are most likely the same people, just the name that referred to them changed over the course of history, but they are the same people. And recently I was doing a video on my TikTok and Instagram about the Draco Standard, which was a military standard used, and we'll explain we'll recap the origins and everything a little bit. But in my research, I found a link to the Scythians and the Sarmatians.
The old rabbit hole.
But in England, specifically the myth or legend and history of King Arthur, which Jonas has also talked about before, the historical basis for King Arthur. And I've talked about Arthurian myth a little bit in one of my favorite films, Excalibur, which is a take on the Arthurian myth. So I love Arthurian legend and that period of history. And I found that link very interesting. It was not a coincidence, because we don't believe in coincidences here. But it was a synchronicity that I found a Scythian Sarmatian connection in the topic I was researching, and that happened to be what Jonas was covering recently. So I said, "Hey Jonas, I found this in my research for my video, and I would love to breach it with you and explore it."
Yeah, I'm excited because I purposefully, for the sake of this video, did not research any of this Scythian Arthurian legend for the sake of learning something live on the show. But also, I'm not surprised at all by this connection, because the reason that I even made the video in the first place was because there is so much interconnectivity between these Proto-Indo-European peoples, regardless of the direction that they migrated in. There just seems to be a lot of overlap anyways, and obviously people at the time, they were much less settled than we are today. So, one branch migrates over, you have the Western Scythians, and then the sort of thesis of my video was the Royal Scythians undergo this change into the Sarmatians people. That's why they become the militarily dominant force on the steppe. They intermix with the Goths, yada, yada, yada. But the idea is that this interconnectivity existed so long before the actual interactions with these people that when they came in contact with each other and started sharing legends and myths and origin stories and that sort of thing, I think that they found common ground so quickly that they just sort of it wasn't even a matter of oh yes, we accept your beliefs. It's oh yeah, we have the same story. You know what I mean? And so I immediately recognized it as plausible, but I'm very curious to hear exactly how this goes. So whenever you're ready, show us what you found.
Yeah, so I'll tee it up a little bit with a little backstory for those who hadn't seen my video on the Draco Standard. So Draco Standard, military standard, that was most famously used by the Roman Empire, but it came from the Dacians. The Dacians were historical people kind of centered around modern-day Romania, and they were one of Rome's principal enemies kind of going into the early imperial period. And the Draco Standard was a dragon or serpent on a flagpole, and it kind of had the head of a dragon, but also had some wolf-like features. And the body was made of cloth, streamers or a tube of cloth, so that when cavalry charged or the wind was fluttering, it would look like the serpent came alive. And the bronze headpiece would produce a noise kind of like a hiss. So it kind of sounded like a hissing serpent, and you got to imagine like a cavalry charge or in the heat of battle, this thing's flying and hissing so it likely originated with the Dacians, who you might famously know used the falx, a big two-handed sword-like weapon that actually forced the Roman troops to upgrade their armor just because it was that devastating in battle.
That's one of my favorite armor history facts.
And it's as soon as the falx comes back in stock, I'm buying one. It's my next sword I'm purchasing.
It is one of my favorite pieces of weaponry to see used in like movies and TV and stuff. I noticed a couple of them. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Barbarians on Netflix.
Yeah, I've haven't sat and watched it, but I've seen clips.
I don't know if it's historically accurate at all for the Cherusci and the Batavi and the Macromani to have falxes, but a couple of them had it, and I recognize it, and I was like, that's a falx, but I don't know if that works, but it's fucking super cool looking.
Yeah, it's an awesome weapon, but the Romans adopted, out of their whole conflict with the Dacians, this Draco Standard, and it became a mark. The Draconarius was the kind of officer name for the trooper who carried the Draco Standard. Became a symbol of the cohort, kind of the way the imperial eagle was the symbol of the legion, so they placed great importance of it, and it spread all through the Roman Empire, and was used even beyond the Christianization of the empire, although it wasn't a Christian standard. For the Dacians, it had very significant religious implications.
Interesting.
Relating to their mythology and their emphasis of faith in battle.
Yeah, and the Dacians were not Slavic yet by this time. The Slavic migrations had not occurred. So these are like the indigenous, I guess you would call them like proto-Balkan Indo-Europeans. I'm not sure. I guess you would literally call them Dacians. They would just be the original Dacians.
Yeah. These guys go way back, and it's not entirely certain if the standard originated with them. It might have gone even earlier to the Scythians.
Yeah, well, so the dragon was a very popular symbol in Scythian art, tattooing, that sort of thing, with tons of like even all the way in the east in the Pazyryk mummies that were found in southern Siberia. I think there was a lot of dragon imagery tattooed on their bodies. So it's like, it's a very ancient symbol for them.
Certainly. And kind of serpent and dragon imagery can be found all over Eurasia. And it's possible the Parthians also used this standard, or a variation of it, kind of taking on some more bird-like aspects from their Zoroastrian influence and everything, especially going into the Sasanians. But the standard was very well used, and the Sarmatians also used it. So both the Romans and Sarmatians were using it. And the theory is, and I'll go ahead and share, as I was peeking through, one moment, my just double checking a few things on this Wikipedia article. You'll notice this section. The legendary King Arthur and his knights may have had their origins in the Sarmatian heavy cavalrymen stationed in Britain, with the surname Pendragon borne by Arthur and his father Uther, referring potentially to that Draco Standard. And the source for that claim comes from the Osprey book, Arthur and the Anglo-Saxon Wars, beautifully illustrated by Angus McBride. I have used a lot of Angus McBride artwork in my historical videos. He is an amazing historical artist for a variety of periods. But I thought that connection was very intriguing because the Roman Empire's military, as it sort of goes from the early empire into the later empire, it's continuously adopting local or mercenary or barbarian influence and troops.
Yeah.
Now, it never conquered all of the Sarmatian lands, but Sarmatians... Indeed impossible.
Yeah.
But some Sarmatians fought for the Roman army, and the Romans would station troops from different lands all over their empire. They would move slingers from the Balearic Islands over here. They would move archers from Crete over here, or Syria, kind of taking the advantages of the peoples they encountered in these auxiliary units and bringing them to other places so that they could use those tactics there. And the heavy cavalry influence of the Sarmatians, they were excellent heavy cavalry warriors, as you attested in your video. They had started to adopt armor and more heavy cavalry tactics. So it is attested that Sarmatian cavalrymen fighting under the banner of the Roman Empire were stationed in Britain, in Roman Britain. And of course, the Roman army did pull out of Britain as the Western Empire sort of collapsed. The Roman army withdrew and left the Romano-Bretons to their own devices. But some soldiers remained, descendants of soldiers. And it's very possible that one of these cavalrymen, or at least his ancestor, had settled there, and they had kept some of the standards. The standard was in wide use by a variety of Roman forces at this point, and even barbarian forces other than the Sarmatians, some other Germanics. And it's quite likely that the Romano-Breton warlords who began to fight against the Germanic, Angles, Saxons, Jutes migrating in, rallied around one of these beautiful, intimidating dragon banners. And of course, Pendragon, dragon, there's that whole kind of connection there. So what are your thoughts on all of that?
My first immediate thoughts are the fact that the flag of Wales features this dragon, and also the original English coat of arms was the three dragons. So obviously this imagery became extremely important to them very early on. I want to say, because even the Anglo-Saxons adopted the dragon as their standard, or the triple dragon as their flag. So clearly throughout all of Britain, even in the Celtic areas that had never become anglicized, the dragon was important. So I think it makes perfect sense. And it also makes perfect sense that it would have come, because I'm not necessarily sure. I would be curious to see what their sort of battle standards or symbols that they used in the Celtic regions of Britain before the Roman Empire.
That would certainly be interesting. Real quick, I've got pulled up on the, I don't know how to pronounce it, the Bayeux Tapestry, which is of course documenting the Norman conquest of England. But you can see the Draco banner carried by Anglo-Saxon troops. So you're absolutely right. It was adopted by the Anglo-Saxons.
How could you not? The dragon is just such a badass image that it's it invokes fear in anybody.
Exactly.
Why would you not use it?
It's and that's the whole reason the Romans adopted it in the first place. They saw their enemies using it and thought, wow, That's badass.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the Romans were always the best at taking things other people did well and using it themselves.
Including the people.
Yes,
because that's one of the most fascinating things, honestly, about the Romans is that they were able to go to war with people that were perhaps like not tactically, but maybe just like by brute strength better in warfare than the Romans, but they didn't have like the tact or sort of knowledge that they had about military formations and that sort of thing. So their ability to take people and be like, look, you're never going to defeat us on your own, but you're giving us such an incredibly hard time just by like your strength and determination alone, that if you were to join us, you can have anything you want, you know? And thus where the idea of Roman federates or foederati comes from. And it makes perfect sense, you know? And like, obviously these alliances would be relatively loose. Like they would draw up treaties and they would break them whenever either side wanted to. But it's interesting that Rome is really willing to sort of take on anyone and just shape them into their own and then try and sort of put them back out into the world. Like one of the most interesting things that they did with all barbarian peoples is whenever they would like come into contact with them, if they were able to overrule just one tribe or something, they would have the tribe's king or chieftain offer up their child as a hostage. Along with obviously usually some men in the military as federates or auxiliaries, probably some like tax tribute as well. But the most importantly, they wanted to raise the children of the nobility. That way, when the children turned 18, they grew up, they would send them back to their tribes, state them as the kings or chiefs of their tribes, and then have them lead their people in a Romanized fashion, teaching them Roman ideals, teaching them about Roman gods, Roman battle tactics, and that sort of thing. And sometimes that worked in their favor. Sometimes it didn't. And then you have, you have battles like the Teutoburg Forest, where Arminius was one of these people. He was a hostage who was taken at a young age, I think like 6 or 7 years old. And then when he was 18, he was reinstated as the, what would it have been, a rake of the Cherusci, and then they ended up annihilating an entire Roman army. But it worked out a lot of times. So they kept doing it over and over and over and over and over again until it got to the point where there was really no Romans leading the military anymore. They were all barbarian generals, and thus you had the fall of the Western Roman Empire because it was literally just Germans fighting Germans.
Yeah, it's so funny. And Arminius, it's funny, he has a brother, or had a brother,
Varus.
No, Varus was his was the Roman commander. He had a brother named Flavus.
Flavus, that's right.
Was also a hostage raised, but he remained loyal to Rome, and he fought his brother in Germanicus's reprisal campaigns, which it did work with some, and who knows why one brother chose one fate and the other. But yeah, there's so fascinating. And I've studied a lot of kind of the evolution of Roman structure with foreign troops. It goes all the way back to the very earliest days of Rome, when Rome was just a tiny little town in Italy, and it was sort of dominating other Latin and Italic city-states that would serve as, I called them allies or allies. And their system kind of evolved as they expanded and encountered more diverse peoples. I mean, when you're ruling over other Latin-speaking cities, they had higher social privilege than like a Celt or something.
Of course.
But they continued then the auxiliary system, where men from foreign territories could enroll in the Roman army, and by the end of their term, they would gain citizenship. And then later, as you say, the foederati, that's when things started to kind of really turn around and bite them in the butt, because there weren't many Roman generals, and there weren't many Roman soldiers anymore either. The citizens did not want to fight in the military anymore. The nobility did not want to fight in the military.
It was a losing battle every single time. It just wasn't even worth it.
And barbarians filled those ranks in the east, but in the east it survived, and they continued to use mercenaries all the way until the fall of Constantinople, from Anglo-Saxons to the Kievan Rus to even the Arabs, Spanish. The Catalan company from Spain was very famous in Byzantine or Eastern Roman history because same kind of thing. They come over, they fight well for the Romans, and then they decide, well, we're going to cause trouble and steal shit because we're the guys with the swords.
Yes, exactly.
The Normans, the Roman Empire was always using people of other countries. So that is absolutely fascinating. And they were very good about adopting tactics, weapons that worked, and implementing it into their own system.
Just really anything that worked. That was like almost, if you think about it, I was kind of talking, I'm currently writing a video, or it's already written, I'm editing it right now, on the entire history of the Goths. And one of the things that I find the most fascinating, and also was the greatest fucking headache when making this video, was the fact that it's not a clean tribal division of, you got Visigoths on the west of the Dnieper River and Ostrogoths on the east. Because then you also have the Gepids in the middle, who are of somewhat Gothic descent, but they're called Gepids because it literally means slow in their language. And in the mythology, there were 3 ships that came over from Sweden to Poland. It was the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, and the Gepids. And the Gepids arrived much later. And that's why they are not, that's their myth. And it's so funny because you think about it, it's like these people are seen as like the slow younger brother that never got to be part of the cool kids when the Goths established their kingdoms and stuff. And so while they're warring with these people, they're coming across their Gepid kinsmen. And there's a famous story where a Gepid general is confronted with a Ostrogothic king in the middle of battle after the Ostrogoths were being defeated. The Gepids were serving as the Eastern Empire's sort of auxiliaries. And then one of the men yells at him and he says, "Dog, would you kill your own king?" And that's when he realized it was the king of the Goths, because there was a mutual understanding. 1, they spoke the same language, Gothic, and 2, they had this mutual understanding that they all served the Gothic king. And so he ran him through with his sword immediately for the glory of the empire, which, as the Goths always sort of touted over the other Germanic peoples, is that they are only allied to Rome for the money. We are allied to the Goths for the sake of the sanctity of the family and our lineage and that sort of thing. They were very proud people. But that's what is just so fascinating about all of this, is you would find even pockets of Goths who not deserted, but sort of defected, I guess would be the word, from the Gothic military, from the Gothic kingdom, and they would serve in the Roman army as well. They were much smaller in numbers because, like I said, the Goths were very proud, so that was not typical amongst them. But there would be pockets of Goths fighting against other Goths at the time when the Goths were at their height, just because Rome was willing to offer them a lot of money. And it really just kind of shows you who is who, It's like if you were fighting for Rome, maybe you were sold in there as a slave, maybe you were just a little bit greedier than your brothers and cousins,
Yeah, there's always money for mercenaries.
Oh yeah.
If you're a good fighter and you're willing to take the highest bidder.
And if you're ever wondering why how a more powerful army lost, like how a city was taken or how a city was laid siege, when it just doesn't make sense, the numbers don't add up, it's most likely because they weren't getting paid enough. I've learned that is a huge part of it, because that the emperor has got to provide for them in some way, whether it's gold, whether it's allowed plunder from the city, or whatever it might be, land. If the emperor's not paying, we're opening the gates. We're not fighting, Yeah,
it's kind of funny because in modern times, especially, war profiteering kind of benefits, corporations, manufacturing companies, kind of the elites, if you will. But very often in ancient times, it was kind of the opposite. It's like the soldiers are the ones who are going to get rich, and that's why they're going to fight. And if you can't make them rich one way or the other,
we're not fighting.
They ain't fighting anymore.
Yeah, it is one of the sort of one of those things that just keeps going back and forth in history, huh? If you look back, in the Bronze Age, for example, history was fought amongst the nobility. Wars were fought by the nobility, by the upper class, by the aristocracy. Then you have the collapse of the Bronze Age, and then you come into the Iron Age, and it's this period of rebuilding, and now war has kind of become something more democratic that's not only available to everyone, but is required by everyone because the aristocracy is shaken, and in a lot of places there is no aristocracy anymore. So you have these coalitions of farmers who have to, work their entire lives, but every once in a while they got to march into battle. And that's why you see the formation of things like the phalanx, where you could teach it to a 5-year-old in an hour. Don't move and just keep marching forward. And then war becomes kind of democratic again, where it's everybody's taking part. And then it shifts back again in the Roman period. You have more of the aristocracy, the nobility fighting. And then you go into the Dark Ages, and it goes back to being democratic and everybody's fighting. And then you have the chivalric period, and it's again the nobility, and only the nobility is fighting, and they're protecting the serfs. And we keep I'm not even exactly sure what it is that causes that. Obviously, economic collapse to some degree, but it is interesting to see that reversal constantly taking place. In some periods, the nobility is paying the commoners to fight, and in some periods, the commoners don't have to fight. They're protected by the nobility. And we're definitely in that period of time right now where the commoners are fighting and the nobility sit up in their crystal palaces. They never see war in their life.
Yeah, tons of things that could be explored with that. Definitely the conditions of modern war make it very hard for, king can't really ride into battle when you can get blown up with a rocket from miles away. But what's interesting, kind of going back to the legend of Arthur, it's kind of one of those flux periods we're talking about, because after the Roman conquest of Britain, the Roman army garrisoned Britain against raids from the north and from other peoples. The Roman army protected the Romano-Breton people, the Celts that lived there, and then the Roman citizens that had moved, and the mixes between them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They didn't. The Celts could drop their own kind of local fighting culture because, well, they lived under Roman rule now. Roman soldiers did all of the garrison duties and protected the borders and fought against raids, so they didn't need to be, and especially after they revolted a few times, and the Romans
and were just
obviously
squashed.
Didn't take kindly to that. They were kind of demilitarized, and even the Roman citizens that lived there, even veterans who settled down and everything, they didn't need to fight. They could enjoy living relatively peaceful lives while the Roman army kept order. But then, in this sort of collapse period of the Western Empire, and you've got the army withdrawing, and the Romano-Breton people are begging for support. There's some correspondence that they send to one of the rebel emperors in Gaul in the 5th century, where they're like, we're starting to get raided by... Can you please send some soldiers?
I want to say that it might have been the Emperor Jovinius, because he was like a usurper king.
It might have...
Let me see if I'm right about that.
All their names get kind of jarbled.
I know.
Especially in that period when every general with 2 guys is like, I'm emperor now.
I think he would have been a little bit early, because it looks like he died in 364, and I believe that the Roman army pulled out of Britain a little bit later.
Yeah, they pulled right... I think right before Rome was sacked by Alaric, a couple years before.
So 408 around there, 410.
Yeah, late late 4th century, early 5th century, the Roman army was out.
408 to 410 is exactly.
So then you got a whole populace that lives there, and the majority of their protection's gone. And these invaders from Scandinavia and Germany are coming over and starting to not just raid but conquer. And the people kind of have to remilitarize somehow, or get killed or conquered, and
democratically.
Yeah. The average people, but also we start to see a little bit with someone like Arthur, maybe the genesis of a new warrior nobility. If he was a cavalry officer that remained behind, or at least descendant of, maybe he busted out that old banner and is like, no one's stepping up to the plate. I'm going to lead you guys.
Yes. Yeah.
Train you guys and give you guys hope. Carry this dragon banner. And you looked into a little bit the historical officer that might have been Arthur. But whoever he was, had some success in repelling the Anglo-Saxon and Jute invaders. And Wales, when you bring up the Welsh flag with the dragon, Wales is kind of a little bit the Romano-Celtic or Romano-Breton area that the Germanics could not push into and conquer. Yeah, it kind of what remained of the Romano-Breton resistance, if you will. Mm-hmm. And it's very funny that their flag is
exactly that standard.
It's and of course, as we said, even the Anglo-Saxons adopted it. And it's kind of funny too, because the Anglo-Saxons, the English, adopted Arthurian legend as their own, despite King Arthur, the historical Artorius, being an enemy of the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes. But he cut the myth of Arthur kind of seeps into their culture. Yeah. And by the time of England as a proper medieval state, the one we think about, King Arthur is an English figure more than anything. Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting too, because the first ever writing of him, I know that we mentioned this already, but the first ever writing of Arthur comes from Nennius, who was a Welsh monk. So the first time that you ever see his name in writing, I'm sure there was obviously an oral tradition much earlier, but Nennius in Wales is the first to write about King Arthur, and he writes about him in a very sort of historical way. It doesn't really sound fantastic. You don't have like the Island of Avalon. You don't have the Knights of the Round Table. It's just Artorius was a Roman Briton warlord who, assembled them all, led them in battle. He was able to fend off the Angles and the Saxons for a period, and then he wasn't anymore. He was killed at the Battle of Comlan, I think, was it? Something like that. And thus ends the story. On to the next thing. And it's like, and then you have somebody who just like picks up the, Christian de Troyes, is a French name, I can't remember, Troyes or something like that. He picks it up and then he starts adding like the elements of, the Knights of the Round Table and Merlin and and Guinevere and these sorts of things. And then the ball starts rolling, which obviously those things are going to be picked up on for different aspects of whatever's going on in the culture. But I think it just sort of gets to a point where, you have like, once you had, because let's see, when did the King Alfred the Great, he established the Kingdom of England, I want to say like in the very late 800s, early 900s.
Yeah, I want to say
843 or 850 or something like that.
I want to say it was 9th or 10th century. So yeah, 800, 900.
Right around that turn of the century. You have this person who's been living in these Celtic territories, these previously Celtic territories, for hundreds of years now. So obviously some myths are going to be exchanged, adopted. They have some interactions with France and the Normans. So there's going to be like some mythological overlap that gets added to this character. At some point or another, it becomes a part of everybody's mythology, just because it's like, maybe there was a bit of it that's like purely Anglo-Saxon. Like maybe the whole round table thing, this is something that I've thought of. Maybe the round table is a sort of homage to the all thing. that the Germanic tribes would hold, the Folkmoot, where the Germanic tribes would come together. They would put their swords aside in the way that the Knights of the Round Table would put their swords in the middle of the table. At the Folkmoot, they would all put their weapons aside because nobody's going to fight. We're just going to speak. And maybe that was an Anglo-Saxon Germanic tradition that carried into the King Arthur story. And at some point, it just starts to blend. It becomes everybody's story. And then, it becomes Britain's story, it becomes England's story. One thing I did want to mention really quickly, because this will come out after the video that I'm supposed to be keeping a secret will come out, is that the people might have seen my story about my 33rd great-grandfather that was just discovered. I am the 33rd great-grandson of King Alfred the Great.
What?
Yeah. So King Alfred the Great is my direct 33rd grandfather on my father's mother's side. My father's paternal lineage comes from North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany. Their family had been there for generations, never left. That's where the Kilker name comes from. But my dad's mom's side, my grandmother's side, comes from England. Specifically, she is the 31st great-granddaughter of King Alfred. And so it makes sense too, because when I did my G25 coordinates and the DNA stuff and all of that, it said that I was primarily, of all things, medieval Anglo-Saxon was like the one that turned up the most. And I think that might be because the Anglo-Saxons were like a very predominant people. We still have a lot of their sort of like archaeological, like grave findings and all these things. And the more well-preserved culture is archaeology, the better that we can trace their genetics and DNA and stuff.
Yes, they are very well archaeologically attested.
Yes, exactly. And so we have a lot of their genetic remains. And because of that, I think that they were it was one of the things that they were able to trace in my DNA the best. Which I thought was super interesting because, somebody called me, I was talking about the Spanish a lot. I was talking about my mom's side, her Portuguese roots. And they were like, you're not even fucking Portuguese, you Anglo-Saxon. Why don't you, And I was like, wow, that's correct. Actually, I am very Anglo-Saxon. At least a quarter. So I thought that was a cool little bit of history. But there's a good video that my friend who does genealogy, he offered to do, like, because I have done an extensive ancestry on my dad's side of the family, mostly on the German side. And I didn't really know that much about the English side, funny enough. And this guy was able to help me find a bunch of my ancestors going back way further than I ever could. And his favorite finding was that King Alfred is my 33rd great-grandfather. Very cool.
Hey, what are we debating for? Tap into those blood memories and
that's what I'm saying. Well, see, that's what actually got me thinking about, like, I started thinking, I was like, what about this King Arthur legend like resonates with me in a sense? And I really liked the idea of the whole like chivalrous Knights of the Round Table thing, because I am a believer in Jesus Christ. Some people say I'm not a Christian because of my other beliefs and stuff. We don't need to get into that right now. But I think it's very interesting, the sort of Christianization of the King Arthur legend, because obviously Christianity was not incredibly popular. It was the religion of the Roman Empire at the time when they were in Britain. So obviously there was some Christian influence there, but the Anglo-Saxons who came in were absolutely not Christians yet. It took them a while to become Christianized. They eventually were, and then they were the ones who evangelized the Vikings, the Swedes and the Norwegians and the Danes and that sort of thing. And so I thought that the Round Table thing, which came about in, I believe, the 11th or the 12th century AD, is a perfect allusion to the sort of Christian chivalry and ancient pagan Germanic ethos being sort of intertwined.
It's very fascinating, yeah, because as you said, the Romano-Britons by the time of the Roman withdrawal were Christian through and through. And, of course, they weren't originally. The Celts who lived there weren't Christian, and the Romans weren't Christian when they conquered them. But by the time that it had been the Empire's religion, and these Germanics come, and they're pagan, their own Germanic paganism. But I read an interesting article where the Anglo-Saxons actually reproduced a lot of earlier Celtic art. Like, they would find old Celtic religious designs and motifs and stuff, and they must have thought, oh, this stuff's awesome. It
reminds us of our past.
yeah. It must have resonated with them, their more pagan beliefs. And the modern Romano-Bretons, the descendants of the Celts who had made this stuff, had kind of disavowed that for their Christian beliefs. And it's kind of like, it's kind of funny that the Germanics came over. It's like, oh, look at all this cool stuff you used to do.
Yeah.
But of course, then the Anglo-Saxons themselves became Christian, and it's interesting. Now, Excalibur obviously is not a historical film at all, but one of the things it kind of wrestles with is the departure of the old gods and the coming of the new god.
Right.
It occurs, right? Merlin and Morgana and the dragon, which I'll want to talk about a little bit later as a metaphysical concept in the film. But they're part of that old fairy pagan world, and their power is kind of fading as Christ comes into the land and the Arthurian kingdom becomes Christian. And
and there's also sort of that imagery of Christianity sort of because, in the sort of Nietzschean ethos, Christianity is anti-nature in its worst aspects, and so they kind of like play on that in the film, where Merlin is this god, like he speaks for the forest and he speaks for nature, and as nature dies, or as Merlin dies, nature begins to die too, because he's like the last of the sort of pagan nature worshipping remnants. And I think that they did a really good job at showing that.
Yeah, Nietzsche talks about this.
He does. He literally does. I have not read that much Nietzsche, but I have read Beyond Good and Evil, and I can tell you that he does word for word say nature exists beyond good and evil, meaning beyond morality.
Gotta love that reference.
You really do. It really is the most anti-Nietzschean thing to actually read Nietzsche.
Yeah, so the film, because John Borman, the director, his whole thing was giving the Arthurian legend a legendary mythical quality. That's why it's so surreal, and why it takes from so many different traditions of Britain. You've got Christian influence, you've got Germanic influence, you've got Celtic influence, kind of wrapped up all in this ball of very chivalry. I mean, they're wearing plate armor.
Yeah. That's the other thing I was going to say, is like, it's the armor being anachronistic, but so fucking cool.
Yeah. And Mordred has a very pagan looking armor. It's almost like Greco-Roman.
Right.
And that kind of plays into the whole pagan versus Christianity aspect.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. The fact that he's got that mask that kind of almost looks like a Greek theater mask.
Yeah, and that musculata cuirass, that kind of like a hoplite or a Roman officer would wear, that muscle.
Right.
It's kind of shaped like
I've never noticed that. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that.
So that's all. It's all
great movie, by the way. If you guys haven't seen it, you need to go watch it.
Oh yeah, I reference it too much. And it's kind of it, but the Legend of Arthur, like we were just talking, evolved with the times. And for like an English knight in the 100 Years' War, his conception of Arthur is a lot closer to that chivalrous, knightly Christian warrior king. But for the Romano-Bretons, Arthur was like, he was my war leader right there.
Yeah. He's like my dad's cousin.
Yeah. This legend's kind of adapted over time, but bring it kind of full circle, like an Ouroboros or an Ouroboros, depending on how you pronounce it. I got some flack for pronunciation.
Scythian, Scythian, it's all the same shit.
So we see how this Legend of Arthur goes from, post-Roman Britain through the medieval age. But this Sarmatian-Scythian connection makes it reach all the way back into like the Bronze Age, potentially. If we can trace that standard, that dragon imagery, all the way back to like Bronze Age Scythians and it survived into these Sarmatian warriors who, as you said, were basically just the royal Scythians, who ended up in Britain under Roman service and then had to fight against Germanic invaders. It just, the timeline of this dragon motif tying a huge swath of history and culture and mythology together over thousands of, it's kind of mind-blowing, really.
It is mind-blowing. How
far back it reaches and how far distance from the steppe to the British Isles. It's wow, it's very impressive. It's very exciting.
It does, yeah,
and I just love how it all kind of ties together.
It does lend a lot of credibility to the fact that it's very likely that there were some heavy Sarmatian cavalry serving in Britain at that time because of the foederati, the auxiliaries, the barbarians that were incorporated into the military. The Sarmatians were a huge portion of that. Or even their distant cousins, the Alans. There's so many sort of barbaric, Germanic adjacent steppe societies or confederations that became very heavily Romanized. And so I really like that idea. I didn't know how that was all going to go, but it makes perfect sense to me. I'll say that.
Yeah. It's kind of funny, I guess, if he was a Sarmatian or descendant of a Sarmatian cavalryman, I guess he would be Germanic adjacent, leading Romano-Bretons against other Germanics, kind of a Germanics fighting Germanics again.
Wouldn't be the first fucking time.
Except this time without pay.
Yeah.
At least from the Empire.
That's the other thing too, is like, it's so interesting because, I made that video about, the first episode of the Proto-Indo-European migration series was on the Celts and the Germans, and more so than the other 3 parts in that series, that video was a lot more analytical and like philosophical, because I thought it was just so fascinating that the Celts and the Germans, they come from roughly genetically the exact same line of people, other than the fact that the Celts had more Western European farmer DNA than the Germans. But as we know, with these steppe societies, the men, for whatever reason, outcompete the local farmer men. And so their Y DNA, their genetics, tend to win out in the end. Long story short, by the, let's say, Middle Iron Age, like around 500, 600 BC era, the Celts and the Germans genetically were very, very similar. And then all of the Celtic territories just explode outward, and they're interacting with Rome, and they're migrating to the farthest stretches of Britain in the north and all the way to southern Spain and Portugal in the south, all the way to Anatolia, Turkey in the east. Like, they just explode everywhere from this little Central European region centered around Austria, where the first Celtic culture culminated around 700 BC, I believe. And then the forests in Germany and Northern Europe and Scandinavia, just dead silent until about 100 AD. That's when Tacitus is writing his Germania, and that's when they just 600 or 700 years of them just being no, we're cool here. We're cool here. Not going to do anything. And then they just I don't know if it was planned or not, they struck while the iron was perfectly hot. And that's why we all look German. That's why we all look a little German. Everybody in Europe. Because if you're Italian, you have Ostrogothic or Lombard DNA. If you're Spanish or Portuguese, you got Visigothic DNA. If you're French, you've got Frankish DNA. If you're English, you got Anglo-Saxon. It's literally everywhere that was a Roman province now has Germanic DNA to some degree. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, They made their way around, that's for sure. Um, real quick, I think we kind of hit a crescendo.
Yeah, definitely.
Wrapping everything together. I did want one last little interesting note, just more out of curiosity than anything. If we go with the theory that Artorius was a cavalry officer, Sarmatian or not, it's interesting that the Anglo-Saxons, by the time of the Norman invasion, they used horses for transportation into battle. Nobles, but they didn't actually really fight as cavalrymen. And the Normans did, and that was one of the reasons the Norman knights proved to be able to pick apart the shield wall with their feigned retreats. And of course, going into the Middle Ages, the Frankish and Norman model of heavy cavalry explodes into knighthood, and knights, tactically speaking, go well into the gunpowder age. So that idea of heavy cavalry really takes off. But it's kind of funny, since the Sarmatians were masters of heavy cavalry warfare in their time. It's like, if Artorius was a Sarmatian cavalryman, eventually the Anglo-Saxons, even though they picked up his standard, they must have ditched the whole ride horses into battle type thing, and
maybe
decided
it was
we're sticking on foot.
Maybe it was because another reason too is like a lot of it has to do with geography. That's one of the main reasons that, like, for example, the Celts in like France and Spain, maybe not Spain, but like southern France, southern Gaul, where there's a lot more like open plains and stuff, a lot more use of chariots, but no use of chariots like at all in England. And it's probably just because the territory didn't really allow for it. So maybe it had something to do with the fact that Germans were not really fighting on horses all that much, because they lived in like swamps and marshlands and heavy forests. Like, it didn't really make sense to have any cavalry attacks. So I think it was very much just one of those things where they're like, hey, we saw that worked, but we haven't been doing that for 1,000 years. We're not adopting horses in warfare.
Yeah. With cavalry especially, you need specialized systems to take care of horses, raise horses, learn how to... And they had horses, they just... for whatever reasons, probably a multitude of reasons, they just didn't, until the Normans kind of kicked it into them, and then...
It is interesting that the Normans and the French would have been using it more. Like I said, you see more chariots and just use of horses in general in that area where there's a lot more open plains. So maybe that had something to do with, like, it was a Celtic tradition that just turned into a Roman tradition in that area that became a Frankish tradition, and so on and so forth, and then it just evolved into the Normans.
Yeah, and the Normans must have got it from the Franks, because the Normans were Vikings who settled in northern France, and they must have picked up horses somewhere, because Vikings didn't really use cavalry either. Yep,
exactly. Too dense of forests, marshlands, swamps, that sort of thing. It's just not going to work.
Transporting them on boats is also not the
Yeah.
easiest thing.
No, I've done it. Trust me.
It's all just fascinating how everything in history ties together somehow. Everything. If you go back far enough, if you follow a thread far enough, it all connects.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing too is, if you ever want to make sense of something that you can't quite make sense of, look to the mythology. What does the mythology say? The mythology will usually tell you more than the history will.
People are quick when we talk about, Arthurian legend to say, oh, he didn't exist, the Holy Grail didn't exist, all the fantastical elements, of course.
Yeah. And it's like, that's not the point.
But it reflects very legitimately the evolution of the culture in the area and of his figure and what it meant to the people who lived there and the people who believed in him, and how his story evolved and accurately portrays or reflects the values of those very real societies and people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Last little note. Dragons and Arthurian legend. I don't...
Because Arthur slays a dragon in some Arthurian legends.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that he goes from carrying a dragon, potentially historically, to killing a dragon.
Right. Maybe it's doing away with the old culture and with the new sort of thing.
Yeah, the dragon kind of goes from this powerful beast to gain favor under into more of a villainous. And of course, we see dragon slaying myths all over medieval Europe. But that's kind of funny. In the film Excalibur, the dragon is not actually it's not like a reptile or like a physical beast. The dragon is like this metaphysical concept of the world. Enter the dragon, I think Merlin says at one point. And it's like the dragon is
the beast.
World is the beast. It's it's very kind of metaphysical and abstract conception of the dragon. I remember as a kid, the first time my dad tried to show me it, I was like 7, and one night gets hit by an axe and some blood flies out, and I was like, nope.
Oh, funny.
Turn it off. But the first time I actually sat and watched it, I was confused when he would call upon the dragon to do something, because I'm like, well, where the fuck's the dragon? I don't see a dragon flying around. Mm-hmm. But now I kind of get the more mythological or abstract conception.
Yeah. The dragon is just anything that you don't want to face. The dragon is just like it's the danger looming in the distance, wherever it might be.
Yeah, and I've got this all ties into a video I'm doing about dragons and why we go to the gym. I just went to a gym called Dragon's Lair here in town that's kind of famous. And it made me think, because I was just asking all my followers why they trained.
Right.
And then I was thinking about dragon slaying legends, dragon lairs. The hero goes in, kills the dragon, and it's that facing that. When you enter the lair of the dragon, you're going to face whatever danger or threat may be, and you have to prove your skills and your wit and your strength in battle. And I'm gonna cover it all there, but
nice. We'll be looking forward.
It all ties together. It all ties from Scythian dragons to a gym that I train at. It's like it all is connected somehow.
Nice.
It's beautiful how history does that. We're still to this day, Arthur, his legend, and all these things still mean things to us right now.
Absolutely.
That's part of my project.
We have them on our walls right here.
Yeah, I can't flip my camera, but I also have.
Yeah, you have can kind of see it.
Yeah, we are still interpreting and adding on to these legends today. They still very much are alive for us, which is
absolutely
beautiful.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap up. There is I wanted to do a sort of section just to kind of talk shop for a little bit. Dane and I are planning on trying to turn this show into a live show so that we can have a little bit more interaction with you guys. We both are keen on live streaming more, but it's just harder to kind of pick dates and logistically and yada yada. I think it'll be a lot easier if we can just agree upon one day a week to sort of do this, which will probably be like a Friday or Saturday, because both Dane and I still work. We're trying to change that, but the time
and you
being,
can help.
Yes, you can help us. But yeah, so we're gonna figure out a way to do that. That way we can make the show a little bit more interactive, and maybe at the end next time we will save some time for a little bit of a Q&A for anybody who wants to ask questions, that sort of thing. So go ahead and drop us in the comments, please, what you like better, barbaric banter or barbarian banter. Not very different. Or if you have an entirely different idea for a name, feel free to float it to us. And yeah, I think that's going to be just like the sort of engaging question for the week. Next time we'll have another one for you guys. But thank you guys all for tuning in to the very first episode. And we will see you guys in the next one.
All right. See you guys on the next one.